and here he was lecturing in this prestigious college. In 1818, he and his colleagues launched Serampore College. Look at this lovely emblem of Serampore College. And notice the emblem of a phoenix. This bird that feeds her young from her own blood, because she has nothing else to give them. And the open Bible and the cross, but that's not just any cross, that looks like the Crusader crosses of Knights of St. John. And he taught theology, botany, zoology, Sanskrit, Arabic and English literature. Those are the first languages. And you'll see just now why zoology and botany. Magnificent college and incredible impact. Here you can see the command of King Frederick VI of Denmark, by the grace of God, King of Denmark, who declares that William Carey and his colleagues, the inhabitants of the town of Serampore in Bengal, being desirous of founding a college to promote piety and learning, particularly amongst the native Christian population of India, have to secure this object, erected suitable buildings, and purchased and collected suitable books, maps, and have humbly besought us to grant unto them and such persons as shall be elected by them in their success to form the council of the college, hereafter named our Royal Charter of Incorporation, and carries on here. This is the King's edict granting him all the powers and authority to launch this first Christian college in Asia. Praise God for a Christian King of Denmark, who's doing what, unfortunately, the King of England was not doing at that time. It was Carey's relentless battle against sati for 25 years, which finally led to the famous edict in 1829, which banned widow burning, which is even called Carey's edict to this day. Carey was also the first man who led the campaign against the burning of lepers. He campaigned for humane treatment of leprosy patients and ended the practice of burning them alive. Carey had a comprehensive view of the fulfillment of the Great Commission. To him, the Great Commission is ministering to body, mind, and spirit. He introduced ideas of savings banks. Why would a missionary be involved in savings banks? So that the poor people would have a way of being able to build a house for themselves, own some property, by lending systems of saving banks. He made investment, industry, commerce, and economic development possible to uplift the people of India. He did more than the government of India did to do this. He founded the Agricultural Horticultural Society in the 1820s. Notice, this is 30 years before the Royal Agricultural Society was established in England. He wasn't just the first in Asia, he was even ahead of England on this. He introduced the steam engine to India. He pioneered the idea of lending libraries in India. Why? Spread knowledge to raise the consciousness of the people on all these issues. He persuaded his friends in England to ship out tons of books to regenerate and reform India. And by the way, when I read that years ago, I started writing to friends of mine who are authors in America and Europe to donate books for us to distribute in Africa. This has led over the years to more and more shipments, from boxes, mail sacks, pallets, to now 17-ton, 20-foot containers. And Frank has distributed over 100 tons of Bibles and books in the last year. Free distribution of Bibles and books and Sunday school materials all over southern and central Africa. So this project that we're involved in here was inspired by me saying, Carey did this, let's see, I know a few authors overseas, let's write to them and see what can come of this. And what a great idea. He said, in fact, the way Carey put it is, the British government is shipping over ammunition and weapons to India in order to keep the people under control. It would be better if they were shipping out knowledge and the gospel of Christ to uplift these people. And so he didn't just curse the darkness, he lit a candle. William Carey also introduced the study of astronomy into India. I mean, you're probably thinking, this is impossible. How can any one person do so much in one lifetime? But this is the truth. This is just extraordinary. I don't have any example to compare with William Carey. He saw that the prevalent astrology of Asia, with its fatalism, its superstitious fears, its inability to manage time, had terribly destructive consequences. They didn't even have a concept of differentiating between the past and the future. Their language had the same words for the past as for the future. There was no, because such a cycle that how can you plan for the future if you can't even distinguish between the future and the past? Hinduism, astrology makes us subjects. You know, people read the stars in the paper, your stars say, so 1/12 of the world's population is going to have this happen to them because when they were born, you know. I mean, what nonsense. Our lives are determined by the stars? Nope. He said that our lives are determined by the one who made the stars. The Christian science of astronomy sets us free to be rulers. Astrology is superstition. Astronomy is science. Astronomy enables us to devise calendars, identify directions, study geography, and to better plan our lives and work. The stars are there to enable us to take dominion over the earth, be more productive. William Carey was the first man in India to write essays on forestry. 50 years before the government made its first attempts at forestry conservation, Carey was already practicing conservation, planting and cultivating timber. He looked ahead to when there could be he felt bad that he had to chop down trees for paper. He wanted to be sure he's planting more trees than he's chopping down. And he thought way ahead. He understood God has made man responsible for the earth. We're meant to make the world better. William Carey was a botanist who cultivated beautiful gardens like the Serampore Gardens and Calcutta Botanical Gardens. In fact, Melissa, you should take note of this, because he had to wear a big broad hat. He wanted to be a gardener in England when he was smaller, and he was told, you can never be a gardener in England, you've got such fair skin. You cannot be a gardener in England. You've got to stay indoors, you can't be outdoors. So he goes out and he's a missionary in India. But he never lost his love for gardens and for plants, for nature. And so even today you can go, one of the most spectacular gardens in all of India will be the Serampore Gardens, which he planted. He frequently lectured on science, botany and zoology because he says, all thy works praise thee, O Lord. He says, nature is worthy of study because God made it. Carey pointed out even the insects are worthy of our attention. They're not souls in bondage. They're creatures with a God-given purpose. The Indians are thinking, my grandmother could be an insect. He's saying, no, they're not souls in bondage. But we should study them because they're fascinating and they've got a lot to teach us. The Bible says, look to the ant. The ant's got a work ethic to teach us. William Carey is also the father of print technology in India. He introduced the science of printing, built what was then the largest printing press in all of India. He devised the fonts. He had to. There were no fonts in existence for the Hindi language Sanskrit style. In 1812, a devastating fire destroyed his warehouse with his printing presses, his paper stock and his manuscripts, representing years of work, all up in smoke. He at that time was actually lecturing at Fort William College, and so he came back, and in fact it was even worse than that, because not only had this fire started and had one building that had everything under one roof, printing press, study, library, everything. It was disastrous. But the fire was brought under control, and some Indian, trying to be helpful, walked around opening up all the windows to clear the air. And of course the worst thing you can do with a fire is to introduce more oxygen, because a fire consists of fuel, heat and oxygen. So you introduce more oxygen, you feed the fire. If you knock out the oxygen, the fire can't breathe and dies. So, for example, if you shut a shut door can delay a fire by at least 20 minutes. But if every door in a big building is open, the whole building can burn down in under 20 minutes. So that's the problem. He had one roof, one big building, and when they opened the windows, the fire that had been stopped, restarted and destroyed everything. Even in the face of this catastrophe, Carey praised God that no lives had been lost, and he quoted Psalm 46, "Be still and know that I am God." He's resolved to do better translations than the ones that were now ashes. And he consoled himself, every branch that bears fruit, he pruneth it, that it might bring forth more fruit. The Lord has laid me low that I might look more simply to him. However vexing it may be, a road the second time travelled is usually taken with more confidence and with more ease than the first. He quoted Isaiah 61 and trusted God for better printing presses, more accurate translations, a phoenix rising out of the ashes. Not only was Carey hit by the fire, but deaths in each one of the missionary families at Serampore. Every family lost someone. Carey himself just buried a grandson. Carey also had to endure unjust, unbalanced criticisms from the new missionaries who actually split from the Serampore mission, and slanderous accusations from the mission side in England, none of whom had ever met him. He'd He went out the field and he stayed in the field for 42 years and he died in India and he's buried in India. He never went back to England. So the Mission Society, a generation later, didn't even know him. They'd never even met him. And they had these people who failed and came back and Carey's terrible and horrible and slave driver and what have you. And they decided to believe all the people had given up. And they didn't even know the man in the field anymore. And so, do you know he actually got kicked out of the Mission Society he had started? Because they said he was too harsh and hard and unfair. They were hit with an earthquake. They even faced a flood. One of his sons, Felix, caused much embarrassment when he backslid, adopted a lavish lifestyle, and began drinking heavily. Ultimately, however, Felix did come back to the Lord and he became fully committed to the mission. But that would have been a tremendous strain and torment for him at the time. Yet, despite all the controversies and the calamities and the conflicts, William Carey's monumental achievements outshine all his critics. He was a dedicated Christian whom God used in extraordinary ways to launch the greatest century of missionary advance, to translate the scriptures into more languages than any other translator in history, and to save literally millions of lives by his compassionate social action and his tireless labours. Here, the Indian government produced the 6 rupee postal stamp on the 200th anniversary of the arrival of William Carey in India. And look how they honoured him. The Saranpur College education, Christian education, and his translation of the Bible. I don't think the English government printed a stamp to remember Carey for his 200th anniversary, but the Indian government did. That's amazing. He excelled as a missionary strategist. He was humble. He was hard-working. He was industrious. He was persistent. He was persevering. For over 41 years, without a single furlough, he persevered in the field. By the way, at one point a person asked him how he had managed, and he said, I can plod. Everything I've achieved has been by plodding. He wasn't a brilliant man, he said, but it looks to me like he's pretty brilliant, but he said he's just a plodder. Like the tortoise and the hare. The hare can go faster, but the tortoise still beat him because the hare went down this line and stopped him. Just to show you how humble he was, at one point some rich lady at some event they were having there, she looked down nose at him while he's professor at the Saranpur College. Mr. Carey, I believe that you were a shoemaker in England. He said, no ma'am, I was just a cobbler. Now a shoemaker makes shoes, a cobbler just repairs shoes. So she tried to put him down. I believe that you were a shoemaker. No ma'am, I was just a cobbler. How can you embarrass a person who's that humble? He brings it even lower. We need to follow his example by ministering to body, mind and spirit, and by persevering through all disappointments and opposition. You will get disappointments, you will get opposition in missions. It's inevitable, it's part of your job description. But you can keep going because of an unshakable faith in God's sovereign power. Here you can see the newspaper story about the death of Reverend Dr. William Carey. He said, when I'm gone, don't talk about Dr. Carey, speak about Dr. Carey's God.